Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors consisting of some of the best tech leaders in the world, people you may have never heard of, but who in just an hour, you'll know their unfiltered career story. The bets they took, the decisions they made, where they failed, and the lessons that they learned along the way. Welcome to the What Makes You Tick podcast. Hi, I'm Tolu, aka the Podfather, and I'm the host of the What Makes You Tick podcast.
And I am Richard. I am the founder of Tick Talent, and we are proud to sponsor this pod.
So this week's episode is Louis Metz. I would love to hear your thoughts, and then I'll say mine after.
So Barcelona is an incredible tech hub, right?
Didn't know that before. Before I do this, I had no idea. Yeah.
There's I used to work in a company, and we had a hub based in Barcelona because it was this incredible pool of talent. So it's just, as a city, almost like London, it draws people in from all over the world. So what you get in Barcelona is this incredible melting pot of different cultures, of people who are there to just go and take the most they possibly can from the lifestyle. Unlike London, really enjoy the sun. And they, at the same time, can have these incredible careers in tech. So what I really liked about this episode is Louis is probably one of the youngest people we've had on in terms of the tech leaders so far that have been on the pod. I know that, in fact, a couple of people that we've had on the pod, he was like, wow, these guys have gone on to achieve incredible things. But he's definitely on that trajectory. And what I really liked about this one is that Louis come from an entrepreneurial background. So he's been there, done it. He's got the bravery. He's got that risk tolerance that you need to go and have a startup career. And then he's taken those principles into building this massive and successful SDR function within Arango. So what did you love about it, Tolu?
So one of the things I really was impressed by with Louis was the journey that he had in terms of the startup and the company that he'd started with someone else. And that journey of realizing that actually, look, this is costing me too much in terms of it's costing me my health, it's costing me my happiness, and putting aside his pride to say, okay, I'm going to stop it. And because sometimes you think, okay, I'm going to have these awkward conversations with people like I failed and this and that, but he just had a really logical, pragmatic approach. So it's actually not worth it. So let me do the right thing by my life and actually stop it. And I really was impressed by that. And his approach to stoicism as well, in terms of how he processes things and how he leads, I was, just really impressed by that.
Yeah, absolutely. You can almost hear his mind ticking when he's talking. It's an incredibly interesting thought process that he goes through. And he's still an entrepreneur, right? So this whole podcast is about finding these entrepreneurs who have a completely entrepreneurial spirit and are building something, but within a business. So he's a fantastic example. And I think people are going to love Louis from listening to this episode.
Agreed.
So without further ado, let's roll the VT.
Louis, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Tolu.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I think we had a really interesting initial chat, so I'm really looking forward to exploring a bit more and getting into what makes you tick. So what makes you tick, Louis?
I think it's a difficult question to answer very quickly, but I would say, to summarize, probably the waking up and knowing that in front of me there's new challenges to face that will enable some intellectual stimulation and sometimes physical stimulation as well. I want to be stimulated and keep learning new things. I think being in a world surrounded by your social environment that enables that, but also your professional environment that enables that, is what I'm trying to do, and that's what makes me tick. If that's an answer that sort of answers what you were asking and hoping for.
Yeah, that's perfect. And where do you think that comes from, that motivation or that drive for the new challenges?
I think it's also a human thing, right? We avoid boredom as much as we can because we avoid constant repetition, the same thing going on over and over again. So we always look to be stimulated in some way, but I think to a different degree based on the person. But in my case, I just appreciate that because that's what makes me not only learn new things, but also discover new things about myself as well. And that's what I strive for.
It's a really interesting one because I feel like a lot of people are almost scared of the unknown. So challenges often bring the unknown. So I think it's quite interesting because a lot of people I talk to, they want some stability. They want I know what's going to happen. But it also seems like you're quite give me new challenges. Let me learn more about myself. So that's quite interesting.
Absolutely. I think it's about finding a balance, right? Like you want to have
Mm.
a routine for some stuff. In my case, I'm trying to have sort of a health routine for sure. And there's a lot of things that I do every day, but at the same time, you are searching for that sort of stimulation. But I think what you said to the point of finding things about yourself, I think some people are scared as well because it's about finding the truth as well about yourself. And that
Yeah.
maybe gives uncomfortable moments, but I like that.
Because it's what am I going to find in there that I don't know is in there? And there can be some scary things sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What's one of the things that you found out about yourself recently that you were quite surprised about? It doesn't have to be recent, whenever, that you were quite surprised about.
Yeah, recently, I wouldn't say there's something that I was that I'm quite surprised about recently, but over time, maybe there were a few things that I found about myself is until, for example, how far can you go in terms of resilience, maybe towards something, right? Understanding a little bit more also about maybe my own ego and how I can control that or how I cannot control that. I think I found some answers over the course of my life regarding this. So I wouldn't say these realizations came last year or anytime recently, but more quite a few years ago. Recently, you might go through some small changes, but I think I've got a pretty good idea of who I am now.
That's really
Yeah.
good. That's really good. Would you mind talking a bit about your career journey from when you started, what you studied, if you went to university? Would you mind talking a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to keep it brief and to the point. But I went to university in Scotland, in Edinburgh. I studied something that has nothing to do with what I'm working or where I'm working at right now. So I studied economics and philosophy. I chose this course because I enjoyed both subjects and I thought it would be a good balance. But then I went into I went into the startup world soon after graduation, probably a couple of years after I graduated. I wanted to avoid going into the corporate world. That links to the first topic that you brought up about the sort of being scared of maybe the routine and all. That's what I was maybe scared of as well, is that my life would already be defined and I would go into this specific sector and industry, waking up at the same time and finishing at the same time and already knowing where I'll be in 20 years. That scared me. So I wanted to avoid that. I just didn't know the answer with the startup world at the time. And that's something I bumped into probably by accident. And since then, it's been quite a few years that I'm into that world. So when I made startup, I'm referring to the tech startup world specifically. And I've been working for quite a few different ones. And I've had also my own, I co-founded my own startup as well a few years ago. So went through this experience as well. So that's a summary of the career basically, and specifically in sales.
And so where are you currently at in your career at the moment? So what's your current role?
Yeah, so I'm head of sales development at my current company. I've been in that role for a little while, and I'm managing SDRs basically. We're in charge of our department is basically in charge of bringing in new pipeline for the company, scheduling new meetings with relevant prospects and potential customers, and discovering what is it that they're looking for and what we call qualification, right? So understanding a little bit more about what would be the potential use case that they are looking for to use our products, and understanding some pain points maybe and see how we could potentially help. And then we bring it over to the next department, which is the account executive department, where they go deeper into the discovery to then maybe, hopefully, after a long sales cycle, usually, they would sign up a new customer and a new logo.
What kind of company is it that you work for at the moment?
Yeah, so at the moment, it's a company called ArangoDB. Basically, we're selling a database software, but more specifically, a graph database software. And while the name might sound a little bit random, what it means, simply speaking, is it's a tool that helps you understand the complex relationships between different data points that you may have in your environment. So all sorts of companies may use this type of products because all sorts of companies deal with data and we deal with a lot of different use cases. So that's what we sell essentially. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so is this your first sales leadership role, or had you started leading people before? I think you mentioned that you'd started your own company before as well.
Yeah. So it's my first leadership role in this company, in this, let's say, in this context of a company not being my own. But previously, as you mentioned, I did have my own startup, but it was just the two of us at the time. So we had just had two founders, and then I just had a small team of marketing, like 4 or 5 interns. They were not officially employed there. So we had a very small team for a while. So I would say it's the first leadership role within the context of an established startup with like a proper headcount and all.
And what are some of the things that you've been learning about leadership as you've been transitioning into this role?
That's a different role from what I've been used to in sales, when you just focused on yourself, which is more individual focused. When you go into the leadership role, it's the opposite. Actually, you have to take care of other people. But what's interesting as well is that it's similar, it's different and similar at the same time. So when you're in sales and you think about yourself, you still have to deal a lot with other human beings and prospects and customers. But now the shift is that you have to deal with people inside your own company and internally, and improve collaboration between the different departments. So I would say a lot of skills that you learn as an individual salesperson are applicable for leadership positions, but they are also very different because the goal is now teamwork. You have to learn how to be also very patient, and you also have to learn how to see the big picture and not just have a focus that's just about yourself and your own goal, but understanding the big picture of like where we're going as a company, and sort of use creativity as well to find different approaches. And yeah, like helping out a lot is also a very important aspect there.
And so what are some of the things that you've been doing to grow in your leadership? How have you been learning about it?
I think the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is learning how to be open-minded. And what I mean by that is not just a random word, but very much open to not only new ideas, but different perspective, and learning how to deal with different people also differently. That's, I think, has been the biggest challenge, which is not something that I was going to expect originally, but it ends up being like that. You have to collaborate with different departments who think differently. You have to use a lot of empathy to understand what they're going through and understand what are their own goals as well. So I would say, yeah, like being open, being patient are the biggest thing.
Yeah, patience is a big one for leadership. Were there any really big decisions that you had to make?
Yes. Yeah, it's all relative, right? Like when you would ask big decisions, I would answer what I consider big decisions. Yes, for myself, yes, big emotionally, and that required a lot of thought, and that still made me think. Yeah, I would say by far, I would say in terms of career wise, by far the biggest decision I've made was to stop. Not to start, but to actually stop my own startup, basically, and stop the journey there. That has been by far the biggest decision. Starting it wasn't that much of a big deal in the end, because you just want to, why not? Let's go for it. Let's go for a new adventure. But actually putting a stop to it was by far the biggest decision, yeah.
Would you mind telling a bit of the backstory behind how you started, what happened along the journey, and why you felt like you had to stop?
Yeah, sure. I can share that. I was back when I was working for a company, so in a different startup than the one I worked in. I was quite happy. I was a happy employee there, and I was overachieving on my results and all. But then I met this guy at a party, funnily enough, who had a project going on, but I didn't know that much. He didn't want to share. I just knew that he had some like tech background and like a very high level sort of cybersecurity sort of guy. And we got to know each other. And after a few months, he just asked me to join him on his startup project. And he started sharing with me more what the plan was and what the vision was. It didn't take me that much time to accept that, because I mean, based on what I told you earlier, like I like these new challenges, and I thought I would learn a lot from it, and that it would stimulate me, even though it would be a sacrifice financially. And I understood that theoretically, but then in practice, it was obviously a different matter. But still, I knew that I had to go through it. And so it was an easy decision, and I joined, and then it's been a journey of 2 years, more or less, trying to create everything from scratch, because there wasn't even a product. It was more or less an idea, and the product had started, but it took a long time to develop. Technically speaking, it was very challenging on his side. So on my side, it was really about, starting everything from scratch, not only on the legal aspects, but the sales, the marketing, everything. So I learned a lot there. But then when we started to be in a better position, we started looking for investment, and then COVID hit, and it was not a favorable context for us, mixed with other factors. We decided to put a stop to it because we had no money. It was psychologically not only very challenging, but then you realize that it affects your health. It's not only the mental health, but then as a result, the physical health, everything is related. And I just reached a point when I just asked myself, is it worth continuing, considering the state of what I'm in? And I was doing the projection, and I thought, all right, how long would it take until I have a normal life again, at least financially? And it just took too long. And so I was just asking myself, was it all worth it? And then I came to the conclusion that no. And I was looking very rationally at what were the blocks that would not enable me to stop. And it was all about ego, basically. It was all about ego. And that was the main problem. And that's when I realized if the main problem is ego, then you should probably get over that and just stop. Because if that's the only problem, it's not enough of an argument to keep going. And I get that. Like, ego is a big thing in life. And it's true. Like, when you tell people for 2 years that you're going to be the next big thing, or that you're going to make it, it was also a very ambitious project. It was far from being a modest project. It's hard. Like, then you start picturing yourself, like, how are you going to announce it to people as well? I mean, today, I don't think people care that much. That's the first thing. And then if you question your ability too much, maybe it's a good opportunity to reflect on that as well and see what you've learned. Mistakes are okay, and you haven't been perfect, and we're young, and I have to be easier on myself. It's good to be demanding, but we have to be realistic as well. And then I thought on a more positive, like let's say in a more positive manner, I thought, okay, maybe I could use all these skills I have learned and acquired that led me to some of the mistakes I've made and use them to be more successful going forward. And if it turns out that I want to do something similar again in a couple or 3 years, why not? Why not reconsider it? But the priority at some point was, let's go back to a normal life where I can find health again and balance in every single aspect.
What was the journey like coming back out of it and then trying to find your balance again? Because it sounds like it had quite a big impact on your mental and physical health. So what was that journey like, trying to find yourself again?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think a mistake that could have been made is just stop, not wanting to think about it, start something else, and that's it. That's not what I did. I took a very long time to reflect on that. There was a quick transition from stopping that project to getting back into the startup world with another company, for sure. But I took a lot of time to reflect on what were my new non-negotiables, stuff that I wasn't willing to compromise on, and I had a plan. And so what I did is I got another job, which came quite quickly because I already had established a good network from my previous experiences. So someone who knew me rehired me into another role. At the time, the priority for me was to gain some financial independence so that I could live normally again. And I just established some non-negotiables, and that health would come first now, and that it's not work then health. It's first health, and then manage to establish good guidelines to be efficient at your work, but not at the expense of your health. And health is a really broad topic, and it encompasses a lot of things. It's not just, oh, let's be healthy and let's just do a walk every day. It's not about that. I think we have to be very rational and logical and precise about what we mean by health. And so I try to compartmentalize it into different sort of categories of what I needed to do, and then try to establish healthier lifestyle, basically.
And has that been challenged since then, in terms of situations where you've had to really put your foot down in terms of those non-negotiables?
Put my foot down, yes, but not in a way that caused any problem with anybody. It's just making sure I'm clear from the get-go with my boundaries. I think I'm more clear on that. But I would say the biggest challenge is just putting boundaries with yourself rather than with other people, because communicating that with other people, I feel, is actually quite easy. And people don't really have a problem if you tell them that you want to take time off because you're entitled to take time off, for example. But it was more towards myself that was a real challenge. It's you have to make an effort yourself. You're responsible for your own health. No one else cares. And you have to be responsible for that. So get your shit together when it comes to this. So I would say I was challenged because I wasn't I haven't taken care of myself up to this point, basically, at least not mentally. Maybe physically a little bit more, but mentally not at all. So I've been challenged, because it never came naturally. I had to really implement the process, which is far from perfect, but it's a step-by-step journey, right?
Definitely. And you mentioned about you took some time to reflect. Where does some of this reflective practice come from for you?
I could answer that. I studied philosophy at 4 years at university, so that took. It came from quite a while ago. I think that's the reason I started liking philosophy. To be honest, I just like reflecting. I wouldn't be able to pinpoint exactly the moment where or why. I guess everyone's on a different spectrum when it comes to maybe being socially, emotionally aware or not. And some people are good at other stuff. And I think what I like is probably people, and I like to think as well generally about decisions I make. So I wouldn't be able to pinpoint exactly where does that come from, but it's been a while that I reflect a lot on decisions that are being made and other stuff. Yeah.
That makes sense, because I was curious because you mentioned that you picked economics and philosophy because you liked both of them. So I was intrigued as to, philosophy is quite like a specific thing. So I was trying to understand, where did that kind of love of philosophy come from?
Yeah, it came from around 16, 17 when I started to study at school. I just realized that I really liked it. And so that's why I chose to study this at university, first philosophy. But then I thought, okay, but just with a philosophy degree, that might not get me where I want to. So why not do economics? Because like I was okay at it as well. And I thought it was a good combination and balance between more of a sort of the intellectual side and then more of a mathematical side of it.
Is there anything from your philosophy background that you use in your day-to-day job now?
Yes. So not at all in terms of what you learn in terms of specific theories or specific ideologies or specific authors, but just I would like philosophy is really about the constant exercise of questioning things and of trying to formulate your arguments well. And I think this is applicable in everyday life, and that's for work and other parts of everyone's life. At work, definitely. It allows you to I think these skills can allow you to understand the big picture, for example, that I was talking about earlier. Try to remain calm as well and very stoic. I think that's very important as well that I learned from this. And having a very rational approach and logical approach and being able to separate the emotional side of things and the rational side of things in a very practical manner. I think that's something I use every day. Yeah.
Because I really liked what you were saying about earlier when you were challenging your ego and saying, look, what's actually really stopping me from quitting or closing this down? It's my ego. So if it's my ego, it has to go. And that's a very like step-by-step methodical approach. So I really enjoyed hearing about that. You mentioned about being stoic. What does that mean to you?
It means first of all, keeping calm in the face of potential problems and challenges you have, and keeping a very rational approach in the face of, again, potential conflicts, challenges, pain that may arise, and that you should not give in to your emotions, especially when things require a very logical analysis and a very calm approach. I would say this is the first thing of this is what it means to me. Remain calm.
Are there any things that you found useful in terms of staying calm in some of those situations?
Yes, because I think it's important for yourself. You might regret when you give in too much. I'm very wary of emotions in general, and it's not about denying your emotions at all. You should be aware of your emotions and you should accept them, but you shouldn't act on them. And I think that's a very challenging thing for every single person because we're all human and emotional beings. But it's an exercise that I do to try to differentiate both. And the way that I do that is I need to be aware of my own emotions. The better I'm aware of my own emotions, the better I can actually remain calm and make the right decisions. So a good example would be anger. That doesn't come that often, but it can happen. For example, a rule would be that I wouldn't act on anything, or I wouldn't talk to anyone the moment I realize that I'm in that state, because nothing good will come out of it. And that's what I mean probably by keeping a rational and calm sort of approach, because that's the only moment when you actually can make the right decisions. So I'm very careful of this.
That makes sense. And slightly different question. What is it that you love about sales?
It would be lying to you if I told you that the reason I do sales is because I'm passionate about it, first of all. Because again, as I said, I started sales, it was more of an accident, right? But then I liked it at the same time. So I like sales. It's true. I wouldn't say I'm passionate about it. But what I do like about it is that I would say a mix of sales and startups. It has to be sales within startup that I like. I would say so, because it encompasses the things that I mentioned earlier. It's stimulating and very challenging. It challenges your ego as well. And I like that. I think that's a good practice to get shit thrown in your face quite often. I wouldn't say I don't mean that in a toxic manner, but just to be challenged, right? I think that's quite important. Absolutely. So I thought about sales, communicating with people. I think since it's a big challenge and it's one of the biggest challenges that everyone every time goes through, right? Like in every part of your life, it's always down to human relationships, basically. And I think it's interesting to have a job that is really about this and that you can basically, the skills that you acquire from it, they're applicable to a lot of other different parts of your life, whether it's personal relationships or friendships or dealing with your landlord and all. I like that aspect.
And you mentioned about relationships, and also before you've mentioned about the network that you've been able to build. So how did you start building your network? Or was that purely through the sales? Because you said you had about 2 years after university before you really got into sales. So was that when you were building your network? How did you go about doing that from scratch?
Yeah, I think there's two different aspects. It is building your network continuously, because that's just a healthy thing to do, I believe, and not necessarily in a overly business kind of way, but just try to learn from people and meet people. I think that's just a healthy approach in general. So that's what I've been trying to do since university, more or less. That's one aspect of it. And then there's what I would say develop network that is more business focused, which is also important. And I've been trying to do that within the context of my own, let's say, careers and the different companies that I've worked with, because I see the value in it. I see the value in it not only for potential future opportunities, but also because it turns out that you learn a lot from people, and you have to select, I think, a few mentors that you really respect and that you want to become like, for example. And it's very important to learn from people. I think being arrogant is fine to a certain degree, but you have to find the right balance, and you have to be also like accepting that it's probably better and quicker to learn from people who have made it, rather than finding out everything yourself.
So you mentioned about mentorship. So do you have a lot of mentors, or is it like you picked one at a time? What's been your approach to mentorship?
There was no specific approach. I would say is just whenever I find someone that is maybe a step ahead of where I am, or I feel, or I respect their intelligence and their way of thinking, and I believe that they are very healthy to me to be around, I would probably qualify them as a mentor in some aspect. There's the mentors that you find online. I have a few there. And then there's the mentors in your real life. And there's also quite a few. And I would detect, based on the sort of advice I'm looking for, I have to detect which mentor would be the most suitable to give that advice. So that's the sort of analysis I do on my side. But I think it's good to have a sort of a broad circle of mentors for different things, right?
What are some of the things that you've been able to glean from your mentors?
That ego thing, maybe. No, like regarding sales specifically, just knowing how to approach sales. That there's a lot of people out there preaching different things, and some of this stuff is a bit of there's a lot of BS, of course, but then there's some stuff that's very valid. So I've learned regarding my own job, I've learned maybe a lot of things regarding leadership from some mentors, but at the same time also just learning basic sales skills and how to communicate to people. These were a very important thing within the context of my job. And in life in general, I would say would be more psychological and life framework that you might learn from potential people. And the way that I would explain this is, I feel like deep inside ourselves, we're very aware of a lot of things, but where we struggle is the ability to structure things into our head and make sense of how we see the world, how we perceive the world, and where we want to go. We feel a lot of these things. Yes, it's very difficult, very challenging sometimes to structure it. And I would say these mentors in the online space, I learn a lot from them when it comes to structuring my thoughts a little bit better and understanding where I'm going. I use this to understand better where I'm going, where I want to go, what kind of person you want to become, and all.
And so when you say the online mentors, are these people that you've never met before, but you watch their videos and things like that? Or are these people that you do mentorship with virtually?
No, the people that I've never met, whether it's by reading them or following them online, some videos.
What are some of the themes that are common amongst the mentors that you follow?
I would say a common theme would be, for example, self-responsibility. That's been very important. And it goes back to what I was talking to earlier, like trying to be aware of what you can control and go away from the comfortable position of maybe blaming external factors or blaming others. So I try to focus on what I can control. And I want to hold myself fully responsible for the course of my life and career.
That makes sense. And how did that play into some of the decisions that you made around the company that you left?
You're referring to the startup that I stopped. Okay. Yeah, I would say so. I think, again, it goes back to the ego part of things. It's accepting full responsibility for the fact that I stopped it and I didn't make it to where I was originally going towards, like in the ideal direction that I was going towards to. Because I think it's very important not to be resentful either. Like I could very well say it was because of COVID, or it was because investors were dumb and not smart enough to invest in ours, or it was because of my co-founder or whatever. I wouldn't say these things ever. I'm fully responsible for where I am today. I'm fully responsible for the fact that it did not go, like, this startup wasn't as successful as I wish it would have been. So I think that theme of self-responsibility is very important, because it also allows you to go on to the next chapter without any negative feelings that stay with you forever and all. And I feel comfortable with it, and I think I learned a lot from it. And I'm really comfortable with the idea that I made mistakes, and I'm comfortable with the idea of looking back at myself and being embarrassed about it. That's okay. And in 5 years I'll be embarrassed of the stuff I say now, in some way, but that's okay. You just try to keep going forward. Yeah.
Agreed. One thing I was curious about is you mentioned having to go back to people who you'd already told about the idea and who you told it was going to be successful. What do those conversations actually go like?
Actually, you don't really have to go through these conversations. Maybe people don't want to upset you, or they sense that maybe they feel that it might make you uncomfortable, so they don't even I haven't had to go through any difficult conversation, because I guess the family gets it, or even if they don't, at least they pretend they do, and they're okay with it. Maybe they're even more relieved, actually, because you go back to having financial stability. It's fine. The friends are feel maybe bad for you a little bit, but when they see that you're doing okay, I guess they're happy for you. There was actually no difficult conversation. At the end of the day, it's just about yourself and the own movie, like in your little head of you thinking that you're more important than what you really are. Yeah, it's like people were not waking up every day being like, "Oh, I hope Louis' startup is going to make it." No, they're just like, "Oh, I've got a friend who's got this random project and he thinks he's gonna make it. Let's see." That's about it. So yeah.
I think that's so important, because that's something that is quite big in people's heads in terms of walking back on decisions that they've made or taking a different direction, is that thing of, what are people going to say? What are people going to think? But like you said, I don't think anyone's really thinking about you that much. And to be honest, most people don't really understand what you actually do. Like when I talk to my friends and family, they're like, I don't actually really know what you do. So most people aren't thinking about us anywhere near as much as we think they are.
So that's a great point. Yeah. Completely agree. Absolutely.
So in your current role, as you're building out your team and different things like that, what are some of the things that you're looking for in the salespeople that you're hiring?
Yeah, that's a good question. If I was going to hire someone right now, in my head, I look out for specific skills there, taking into account that it's not a perfect plan, obviously, but I see a pattern in the sort of successful people in that space, and you're just trying to reiterate it. And I would say some of the main things I would say are persistence. And by persistence, the ability to follow up, and understanding that sometimes it's okay to risk pestering people. That's something that you have to do in sales, especially in a very busy world where people focus on a lot of other things as well. Persistence is very important, and not the ability, not resilience, I would say. And that's the ability not to take things too personally all the time, and the ability to face rejection as well easily. Open-mindedness because you asked me if I was going to hire a salesperson, but it would be a salesperson within the startup framework. And within the startup framework in sales, I think open-mindedness, what I was talking about earlier, is very important, in the sense that you must be very flexible and adaptable to new situations. And new situations can be new things happening with the product, but also new leadership coming in. You need to be able to reinvent yourself a lot, and be accepting that some of the things that you thought were working well maybe last week maybe are not working now in this new also digital world, right? So you need to be very flexible with your approach, very reasonable, rational, not being a slave to your emotions either, because it's very important we want to have a very data-driven approach as well, and it's important to look at the data and see what works and what doesn't, and put your ego on the side sometimes. If you're wrong, it's okay, but the priority is to be very flexible in our way of thinking. I would say these are, if someone comes to me and already has these sort of characteristics about themselves, I would say that's already a good green sort of flag. But there's many other things, obviously, because the ability to be able to communicate is obviously very important, right? So not only communicating your ideas very clearly, but also being able to handle people, I think, is also very important. That's not something you necessarily discover in depth after 30 minutes call. Sometimes people are good at hiding some things. Yeah, exactly. But that's what I would be looking for, generally speaking, without going into the past achievements and the past results and all that. Also, something I would go into.
What are some of the ways that you try and get those things out of people within the interview? Because like I said, it's really hard to get a good gauge on people in half an hour to an hour. So how have you been able to do that and identify those things quite easily?
Again, another great question, because thinking about that in every interview I give, I try to optimize it with the limited time I have with the person. And I think one good thing that I do, I think is quite efficient as well. Going back to the point I was making about communicate well and being able to deal with people, is, for example, the ability for the person to be an active listener. For example, in an interview, I would probably look if there's any sign of interruption at any point, because that's probably a red flag. I would look at any signs if I have to repeat myself because that person wasn't listening before. The ability for them, when I ask a question, for them to be concise and clear and to the point. I may challenge them as well a little bit about their motivations to join us in that journey, to see whether they've done any research and if they're actually motivated to go there, and ask them more about their past achievements, and see how, the same way that you do with me in some way, is maybe challenge a little bit to develop their own thoughts about something, not just them giving me a simple answer sometimes, but sometimes I would try to dig in a little bit deeper, because that way I can detect different things at the same time. Again, as I said, ability to communicate very well, to be very concise, structured in their thoughts, and see at any point in their lives they've changed sort of the way that they thought, and try to detect any signs of like huge ego that would be a problem as well.
That makes sense.
By the way, sorry, I don't want to miscommunicate what I feel about. I think it's good to have an ego, and I think it's good to be very confident, by the way, obviously. But there's a time for that, and there's a moment for that, and there's also a good balance to have between this and being also I think you can be very confident of yourself, but at the same time, being open to the fact that you may be wrong, and to the fact that things may have to change.
It's about everything in its context, right? So there is a time to have ultimate confidence and to know, yep, I own this, I smash it, I'm great. There's also a time to know, I am good, I'm also not perfect. There's going to be things that I miss. There's going to be things that you, Louis, know that I don't know. So it's that, for me, it's about balance. How do people balance the different parts of you that you need? Because so I played basketball, and sometimes it's my job to be super aggressive and to go after it. Sometimes it's my job to play a slightly different role and know that actually I need to support my teammate who can go and be aggressive. So for me, it's about how do you balance those kind of things.
Completely agree. And that comes back to the flexibility point, right? And I think that's a very good skill to have, for sure.
Definitely. And what I'm interested in as well is, how are you building some of these things that you want from someone that you're going to hire into the team that you already have? What are some of the things how do you coach them in some of these things?
Some of these things I think are hard to coach. So, for example, if a person comes into the company as a new hire, and their ability to communicate is very poor, and there's no flexibility at all, and they don't want to help themselves, it's going to be difficult to coach. And I'm probably not going to want to do that. But some other things I think can be more coachable. And I think, for example, the flexibility part and adapting to new ways of thinking. I think a lot of us, because society doesn't allow us to sometimes think outside the picture and seeing the big picture, we're very much wired to have a very rigid process and framework in our head. But I think we can train and coach that. And a good way to do that, for example, is I would like to involve the person in for example, asking for feedback, involve them in some decision-making process, not something that should involve a leader role, but some stuff you can involve a lot, like your team, for a lot of different stuff. And I think that allows them to challenge their own creativity, their own way of thinking, of structuring things, but also allows them to see that you can be flexible, and there's a different way to see things, and that's fine. It also builds them, I think another thing where you can coach them is confidence as well. So, for example, I've known a couple of guys who were very good at what they were doing in sales, but funnily enough, what you wouldn't expect is that the main weakness is that they're not confident enough. They're not that, they're not like they were not, and they're still not extremely self-confident. They're very modest about how they view themselves. And I think confidence you can also sort of coach. And the way to do that is I think involving them more putting them in front of situations that might at first feel uncomfortable, but then they realize that it's okay, you survive from that, but also giving credit to them when credit is due. I think it's very important to value important members of your organization. And sometimes this is not being done enough. And it's important to make them understand that they're very important and they're very intelligent people that you value a lot. So there's different ways.
I think for me, most things are coachable, but it comes down to that thing that you said about, does the person want to help themselves or get better or not? Because the easiest thing could become really difficult if that person is not willing to do it. That for me is the differentiating factor between if it's coachable or not. It's really, does the person want it or not?
I think it's a good way to summarize it. A lot of things that I mentioned before in terms of what I was looking into, most of them it comes down to that for most of these, right? You want to see whether you want to answer yourself the question, is that person coachable, basically? Except if they're completely like miles so far away that you feel like it's just going to be too much and you'd rather hire someone else. But essentially, I think you just want to detect how coachable is that person. And the way to do that is some of the stuff that I think makes sense.
Definitely. One of the things I wanted to ask you about as well was, how have you find selling across cultures? Because you're originally French, you went to university in Scotland, you've been in England, now you're in Spain. So like, how have you find selling across cultures?
Yeah, I think this comes back again to the open-mindedness part. A big thing, like handling people is one thing, but within this handling of people, you need to handle different cultures, obviously, because we're all tied to our culture, whether we want it or not. We are, and that more and more, like especially in sales, actually, which is funny because it gives you a quick overview of some of the main differences between some countries. So you might have a call like in the morning with a French person, and then right after it will be with an English person, and then right after with an Indian person. And I don't think anyone in sales would say that these are not different cultures. Like they are. The way you communicate with them and also the way you set your own expectations with them is very different. So I think going back to your question, going through these different cultures has really helped me with this open-minded sort of thing. And I've been able to, I think, apply this quite well in sales as well, to know who I'm dealing with and who I have in front of me. And that's not to say that I'm generalizing every single individual on this planet based on the culture they're associated with. But that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying there's some trends that you can use to your advantage in order to communicate more effectively, because it is a fact that when you are raised in a specific culture, there's a high chance that you're going to show some of these cultural aspects in your daily life and in the way that you communicate and in your expectations towards another person. So it has allowed me to be more flexible, more open, and understand a little bit better. Also, the concept of there's one right answer or one wrong answer isn't totally true. It depends on a lot of factors most of the time. So again, it comes back mainly to this flexibility, I would say, aspect, which has really helped.
Because I think you're right. It's never to say this is 100% going to be the way, but it's what are the tendencies that happen in this culture, or what are some of the things that are a definite no in this culture? Because you can do things by accident and not even know that's a massive issue. So I think you're right. It's really about, how can I be flexible? How can I be curious as well in terms of how different people and different cultures operate and how they work? Because there are certain things, for example, I'm Nigerian, and in Nigerian culture, for me to call an older person by their first name is like utter disrespect. So when I got to college, and they're like, so they're auntie, uncle, mum, dad, it's never first names. So when I got to college and they're like, oh, call me James, I'm like, but you're my teacher. It's some of those things that are quite tough when you're growing up to figure out what the cultural differences.
Wow, I didn't know that. Well, that's another one. Yeah, that's funny. There are so many of these, right? So I think it's what you said about being curious is also very important, because you need to be open to learning that. If you're not curious, you're basically not helping yourself a lot. But that also comes back to the sort of open-minded thing. Like, you need to overlapping all the time, be extremely open at the idea that there's a lot of cultures out there, and there's a lot of different individuals, and it's okay. Like, there might be some miscommunication, or there might be disagreement on how you handle things, and that's okay. There's no need to be completely over dramatic about every sort of difference of of opinions, of way to see things. So that's also comes back to the point of being also very calm with things. Like, it's okay. Try to be curious, open, let the person speak, understand a little bit, put yourself in their position as well, understand where they're coming from, and it's all going to be okay.
Exactly. That's the thing. Even if you get it wrong, if you're calm, you're humble, you can acknowledge the fact, look, I didn't know. I'm really sorry. Help me to know better. Most people are going to be okay with that.
I would imagine so, honestly. And the ones that are really not, you can ask yourself if you want to
Exactly.
keep having
Do I
a
really want to do it?
Yes.
So I don't want to do it with you anyway. Exactly. So just as we close, if you could talk to Louis at the beginning of your journey, so just after you finished uni, what would you say to yourself back then?
It's all going to be okay. You'll figure it out. No, I would say that maybe that would be something I would say. Yeah, I would probably also say, I'm still young, by the way. So there's a lot of things I still I wish that I can reach. And there's a lot of improvements that need to be made. A lot of progress still needs to be made. But I would say after 10 years, after graduating university, I would probably tell myself, you'll figure it out, and keep having an attitude of wanting to challenge yourself. I would say keep that alive, and don't allow yourself to accept what most people would say is the acceptable thing to do.
Yeah.
It's not because everyone does it, and it's not because most people do it, that it's the right thing for you and the right thing in general. So keep a healthy mind and question things, I would say.
I love that, because there is so much more than what everybody else does. There's so much more. Yeah, I love that. Louis, thank you so much for your time and for your thoughts and for your vulnerability in sharing things that didn't go so well, decisions that you've had to make. I've really enjoyed our conversation, so thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Thanks for listening to What Makes You Tick, and I hope you've enjoyed listening as much as I've enjoyed having the conversation.
Absolutely. You don't have to have met someone in real life to be mentored by them, right? We've all got favorite sales books, and hopefully this podcast is giving you access to a whole new tribe of mentors who, through their stories and best advice, will help you to achieve a bigger and better career in tech. So if you want to never miss a beat, subscribe now, and then you'll get notified as soon as next week's mentor releases their story. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode.